Good afternoon, College of Education, MSU-IIT, colleagues, students, and friends. Before we start, here are some reminders for today's session. Please be reminded to log into the Google form for your attendance today. The links will be posted in our chat box for the Zoom participants and the stream's comment section for our YouTube Live. If you are in the Zoom meeting, make sure that you mute your microphones unless you are recognized to speak. If you open your camera, please make sure that you're not moving around so as not to distract other participants. Certificates of today's public lecture will be emailed to you. So please make sure to log into the attendance and the evaluation link and participate in today's session. For any concerns and questions, use the chat box to type in your query or use the raise hand button. In a few minutes, we will start our program. Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the public lecture on the Open Educational Practices Combating Challenges with an Open Approach with visiting Professor Dr. James Brunton of the Dublin City University, Glasnevin Campus, Dublin. This is brought to you by the Department of Professional Education, College of Education, with the Better Universities and Knowledge for All project co-funded by the Erasmus Plus of the European Union. This visiting professorship is designed to develop our skills in applying the principles of open education practices into synchronous and asynchronous teaching and learning as the College of Education, along with the Institute, slowly matures in delivering quality distance learning education through the innovative and flexible learning and teaching modality. Today's public lecture, which is open for teachers, alumni, and students, aims to look into how we can use open pedagogy assessment to teach about knowledge production in society. With the impeccable momentum built from the last 2 weeks of workshop with our faculty members, I am very excited to what more can we learn from today's session. Without any further ado, let us all stand for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem, for the invocation, to be followed by the singing of the hymno ng pamantasan and the recitation of the Institute Vision, Mission, and College Goal.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw, ay masasirananan, alam ng puso, sa dikit mo'y buhay. Lupang binirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manluluping, di ka pasisigil, sa ganadang tugon sa simoy at sa langit ng bagaw, ay hinanang tula, kawin sa pagkayang minamahal. Ang isang ng katawan mo'y tagumpay na nagtitingin, kapituin at araw niya kailan pang ay magtitingin. Lumanang araw ng marhabing pagsikta, mo'y langit sa pito. Ang ligaya na pagpay ng akin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to meet together. Please help us to come together to make this institution reflect your kingdom. Breathe life into our ideas and decisions. Help us build a team that has love and respect at its heart. Give us the strength to continue working for your kingdom in this time of pandemic. Lord, come give us the inspiration to be the best we can be. May we be a shining example of your goodness and truth within, wherever we are. Inspire our thoughts, discussions, and ideas, and continue to remind us that all that we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of truth for the greater glory of you. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
The MSU-IIT vision, a university committed to the holistic development of the individual and society. The mission, to provide quality education for the development of Mindanao and the country through relevant programs in instruction, research, and community engagement. The College of Education goal, to produce highly competent teachers who will provide leadership in various disciplines through quality instruction, research, and extension to enable them to meet the demands of their social environment and its diverse cultures, thus making them productive agents of change in response to the country's quest for global competitiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, to formally welcome us in this afternoon's public lecture is the Director of the Office of International Affairs. The Office of the International Affairs is instrumental in helping us facilitate our various international engagements, and this event will not be possible without their help. And thus, we are very honored and grateful to have with us here today to welcome us in this public lecture, Professor Joey Martinez, Director of OIA. Sir?
Thank you, Janelle. To the MSU-IIT administrators headed by our dear Chancellor, Dr. Sukarno D. Tanggol, to our Vice Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Dr. Franco Teves, the Vice Chancellor for Research and Extension, Dr. Jinky Bernales, the Vice Chancellor for Administration and Finance, Dr. Pulaos Bari, the Vice Chancellor for Planning and Development, Dr. Gaudencio Petalcorin, the Vice Chancellor for Student Services, Dr. Marie Joy Banawa, our distinguished speaker, fellow directors, deans, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant afternoon. Amidst the present challenges, MSU-IIT remains steadfast in its quest for internationalization. MSU-IIT has been a recipient of two major projects, which are co-funded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Commission since 2020. One of the projects is the BUCA project, coordinated by the University of Tampere, that aims to promote equity and access of higher education through open and distance online learning. And this activity, the webinar that we have today, is actually part of that project. The other one is the Antenna project, where MSU-IIT partners with a university in Spain, that's the University of Alicante, to enhance our internationalization capacity. Soon, MSU-IIT will unveil its Strategic Internationalization Plan, or SIP, which will highlight our aspirations as a university to be more internationalized. It also showcases our commitments on how to achieve these aspirations in the next 5 years. I would like to commend the College of Education for spearheading this webinar entitled Open Education Practices, Combating Challenges with an Open Approach. And of course, many thanks to our speaker for his valuable time. This is our way, or this could be MSU-IIT's way of responding to the various learning challenges that we are facing at the moment. I can assure you that MSU-IIT, through OVCPD and OIA, remains supportive and will always be supportive. In behalf of the Office of the International Office and the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Planning and Development, I would like to welcome you all and hope you will use your learning from this webinar to become better educators of this country. Thank you and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you very much, Professor Martinez, for your warm welcome. And indeed, we are very fortunate to have a very supportive administration with its strategic internationalization plan at place. We are looking forward for the development and a higher vision for the university. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, we will now be hearing the very important lecture of our esteemed visiting professor. To introduce him, allow me to call in the very active coordinator of this visiting professorship, Associate Professor J. Ruel B. Semilia. Sir?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to our participants in the Zoom link, and especially to our participants who are watching us live via our YouTube channel. So, ladies and gentlemen, our visiting professor holds a PhD in social or organizational psychology from Dublin City University Business School in 2009 and finished a bachelor's degree in applied psychology at the University College Cork in 2002. He is a member of different professional bodies. He is a chartered psychologist in the Psychological Society of Ireland and British Psychological Society. He was also the chair of the Psychological Society of Ireland Division of Academics, Teachers, and Researchers in Psychology from 2017 to 2020, and a fellow of the European Distance and E-Learning Network, or EDEN. In line with these academic or teaching positions, currently he is the chair of the Bachelor of Arts in Humanities Psychology Major Program, Open Education Unit, National Institute for Digital Learning, Dublin City University. He was the chair of the Open Education Teaching and Learning Committee, Open Education Unit, National Institute for Digital Learning, Dublin City University. And he served as an expert panel member of the New Media Technology Outlook, Higher Education in Ireland. Additionally, his research interests with a number of publications include processes of identity creation and identity management, identity life domain interaction, online teaching learning pedagogy and strategies, and higher education student orientation or socialization processes. Finally, he is the DCU principal investigator of the BUCA project, or Better Universities and Knowledge for All, advancing equity, access to higher education through open and distance learning, which involves a partnership with Tampere University of Applied Sciences, Finland, University of the Philippines, Open University, Philippines, Mindanao State University, Iligan Institute of Technology, Philippines, Wawasan Open University, Malaysia, Universitas Terbuka, Indonesia, and Universitas Negeri Padang, Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, let us unmute our microphones and let our visiting professor hear our loud virtual applause. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce to you our highly esteemed visiting professor, Dr. James Bronte.
Thank you for that very nice introduction. Let me just share my screen. Can you see my slides right now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yes, so thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to everybody in the Zoom room and who's watching through the YouTube live stream, for giving up your time to come hear me speak about open education and open pedagogical assessment today. Afternoon for you, early morning for me. And a huge thank you to the team in the Department of Professional Education, College of Education in MSU-IIT for inviting me to give this public lecture as part of my activities as a visiting professor this year. As you could see in my in the introduction that was given about me there, you know, my discipline background is in psychology. Um, but it was very early in my career that I kind of not only was I teaching, but I started leading programs, which pushed me to look more at, you know, sort of pedagogical best practice and academic operational excellence, and to look at how you could push that further. And that sort of brought me into a space where I was thinking more about assessment. I was thinking more about teaching techniques. So I've always been interested in how we can do things better. So, you know, early in my career, I worked in a private college in Dublin City University, or in Dublin City in Ireland. But in 2010, I came back to the university that I had done my PhD in, Dublin City University, and I started working way back in 2010 on online open education humanities programs. Now these programs are kind of under the DCU Connected brand, and these are, as I said, open education programs with an open access entry policy and philosophy. The programs that I've been working on for the last 10, 12 years, if you are over the age of 23 and you want to study at higher education level, honors degree level, you can get a place. If you are between 18 and 23, you only have to satisfy our university's minimum entry requirements, which is a much lower bar. There's fewer barriers to entry to those programs than there would be typically for people in Irish higher education. Since 2017, 2018, the program that I'm responsible for is the psychology major program. And this was a program that I developed with a team. And it is the only open access online undergraduate psychology program delivered by an Irish higher education institution. And it's also the first online or open access undergraduate program that has received accreditation by the Psychological Society of Ireland. And, you know, maybe this program is the first of its kind because Irish higher education culture, and maybe Irish culture in general, it's not used, it doesn't have kind of traditions of distance education or remote education or even open education built into its DNA. Irish higher education tends to be quite elitist, and it's really built on this idea of people finishing second level education and then going on to third level education as school leavers, as young people. And other student types tend to be very much in the minority. So, you know, starting on these programs in 2010, I had to get used to this philosophy that I hadn't really come into contact with before. You know, I had worked with different types of students, young students, part-time evening students, but now I was working on these programs where they very much operated to an open philosophy that higher education is a public good. You know, and if higher education is a public good, then the knowledge produced by universities and the knowledge held by universities, you know, should be freely accessible and openly available to everyone. You know, that the remit that the programs I was working on had was to widen participation, you know, to offer flexible entry, flexible progression routes, you know, to a diverse student body, you know, to adults whose commitments, their life commitments meant they couldn't study on campus full-time or part-time, to people with disabilities that meant coming to campus would not have been practical or desirable for them. offering people the opportunity to remain in their communities, wherever those communities were, and study with Dublin City University, rather than having to move to Dublin and find somewhere to live and be geographically located close to the university. And over time, I think that has led me down a route where that philosophy feels much more appropriate and natural to me than the sort of regular Irish higher education culture, which is one of having to achieve very good results in your second level education in order to get into desired courses at higher education level. And it's exposed me to different open educational practices, and especially to the evidence in the literature that suggests that open education and open educational resources and open educational practices have a positive effect on learning and teaching without compromising quality. The literature that sort of suggests that when embedded in the right kind of organizational culture, there are many benefits that can be reaped by engaging in open educational practices. So, it can improve access to education and training when we open up the access routes into higher education. We can reduce the cost of educational and training materials, which improves equity in higher education. If we can remove the barriers of the cost of materials, the cost of textbooks, the cost of entry, maybe depending on the national policy on that in a country, we can improve equity in higher education. We can facilitate more diverse input into the creation of learning materials. If I am willing to share my materials with you and you're willing to share your materials with me, then we're helping each other rather than just getting our materials from commercial education publishers. This can lead to a more efficient use and reuse of our intellectual property, rather than just keeping it on my laptop and sharing it with students and that's it. If we all share our materials with each other, we have a more diverse more diverse set of resources at our disposal. And this can lead to pedagogical innovation. It can lead to better critical reflection on what we do, if we are working in a more open way. And all of this can lead to sort of a more open, more transparent, a more open and transparent education system. And it can allow us to show the public what we're doing more if we are putting it out there into the world a little bit more than we are. If we work in a closed way. And over time, I think this has really been a mindset shift for me. Just by being on an open education program, by getting involved in funded projects where the outputs were released as open educational resources, so actually doing it. I think that was my first real way in, was working on a nationally funded project called the Student Success Toolbox Project, where we made some web-based tools to try and help socialize part-time adult learners to study at higher education level. So just making OERs and having to practically share them out with the sector, that was, that helped me see the benefit of putting open licenses on things. And over time, I've started to engage more with practices, becoming more familiar and learning about what the literature in this area says. I think I started with the practical and I moved more into the literature after that. And that mindset shift is key because of the fact that I think academic culture tends to be closed. We tend to not want to share things, or we tend to be a bit worried about the criticism we might face if we share things, and they could be better. But for me, being open is definitely better than being closed. So just before I get onto the main thing we're talking about today, which is open pedagogical assessment, what are some of the other things that over the last 10, 12 years I've started to do, or my team has started to do, in the area of kind of different open educational practices. So one is around open educational resources, using them and sharing them. So, and again, just to give a definition, because people may not have been to the previous workshops if they're watching the live stream today. So open educational resources are teaching, learning, and research materials in any medium, digital or otherwise, that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits no cost access, use, adaptation, and redistribution by others with no or limited restrictions. So that's a definition of open educational resources from UNESCO. And open licenses are just, if you've ever seen resources with a little Creative Commons license on it, the CC and then, CC BY or CC BY SA, and they're not difficult to do. I'll just, you just have to do that. You just have to go to Creative Commons, click on share your work. If you had an infographic or a set of slides and you wanted to share them openly, click on get started. And all you have to do is decide, do you want to allow others to adapt your work, or do you want them to be able to use it but not adapt it? So make a decision here. And then do you want to allow commercial uses of your work? Click yes or no, and that will give you a license, and you could copy that image, or you can copy the HTML there and use that. You could, if you put that on your work, then others will be able to use that within the restrictions of the license you've chosen. And once you kind of understand what the different kind of licenses are, when you find them on other people's work or in an open educational resource repository, then you know what you can do with that work for yourself. So in our own work, in my modules in the program that I run, we use a lot of open educational resources. We look for video content out there that would complement the learning materials that we produce ourselves. If we are going to use images in our work, we wouldn't purchase commercial sets of images. We would go to the websites where there are either images in the public domain, which means they're just free to use, or ones with Creative Commons licenses, so we can just use those and properly attribute whose image it is. And that's I mean, we use other open educational resources, but they're just some examples of videos and images. And we've also gotten into a habit of wanting to be open with our own work. So if we publish work, we try as much as we can to publish in open access journals. And just the image at the right of the screen there is from a nationally funded project, the Open Teach project, where we were trying to produce materials and produce a course to help part-time online educators to learn how to best teach online. And all the materials from that course are CC BY. So you can use them, you just have to attribute that they came from that project, from us. And so we try to share what we do as much as possible. We try to share that openly with Creative Commons licenses. Another example, a more specific example of open educational resources is using open textbooks. So every year I have a lot of difficulty. I still, in some modules, we still use commercial textbooks, but every year it's a struggle figuring out, have they updated the version? Is it now edition 15 rather than edition 14? And the other problem we have is that because all of our students are off campus, we, as much as possible, try to get books as ebooks, but the publishing availability of ebooks and the publishing restrictions around use of ebooks is very difficult for me. Often, an ebook license that used to be as many users at once as could happen, that all the students could be reading the textbook at the same time, becomes more restrictive. Now only 3 people can read the textbook at a time, and that's an artificial barrier being put on access to that material. So where I can find an appropriate open textbook, which is just an open textbook put out there freely online with a Creative Commons license, where I can find one that fits the module. So my Introduction to Psychology module now uses this open textbook. Anyone can read it, as many people can read it. There's no barrier to the students engaging with that material. And also there is no cost. So if cost was a factor for students in terms of whether they were reading the book or not, that barrier is now gone. And like we've done a little bit of research about textbook use in students, and the things that influence whether they even bother going near a textbook are pretty scary, you know. So you want to remove as many barriers as possible to students engaging with the textbooks. And because this has an open Creative Commons license, and we use other textbooks for research methods in psychology and some other subjects, the option would be there for me at the point where I have the time and the resources to take this textbook and create a European version or an Irish edition, and maybe change some of the examples to more ones that suit more the Irish context or the European context. I can do that. I can't do that with a commercial textbook. So to move on to the main sort of open educational practice that we wanted to talk about today, open pedagogical assessment. If we go back, I think around 2016, 2017 is when I really started to get into this area. And the inspiration came, the real push for me came from attending a session at an OE Global, Open Education Global conference on open educational assessment. It was the conference in Delft in Holland, in around 2000, I think it was 2017. And I had known about this area. I had an interest in this area. I already had a strong interest in assessment and feedback practice. For example, I had brought in a bigger variety of online assessment types into the program, and I had introduced a program focused assessment strategy, which is another kind of important aspect of assessment. But that conference session where I saw people speaking about using open pedagogical assessment approaches and just saw a range of different practices in that area, that was enough to kind of push me over the edge of really saying, I really want to get some of these assessments into the psychology program. I felt like it gave me enough practical examples to kind of empower me and motivate me to go to my team and say, where are the possibilities? Where might we do some of this kind of assessment work? So just to define what I'm talking about, what is an open pedagogical assessment, or what's the other way of an OER enabled assessment, or the other word that people use is a non-disposable assessment. So in terms of defining it, most assignments produced by our students are marked, they receive feedback, and they're returned to the students, who either keep them in a file or an archive somewhere, or they just throw them away once they have the marks and the feedback. Or in terms of what we do with them, most of the time they're just archived with the rest of the virtual learning environment course at the end of the year, never to be seen again. They just go into an archive, and maybe after a certain number of years, the institution just deletes them. Such assignments, to quote David Wiley, such assignments add no value to the world. They're kind of just there for a specific educational purpose. Mark it, great, move on. Open pedagogical approaches to assessment instead look at ways that the assessments could contribute to things like development of the module that they're produced within. So if the students are producing text, audio, video pieces, that they could be kind of pulled back into the module to help teach the next batch of students. And those students like learning from students. The students could, as part of an assessment, they could create MCQ questions, which then could be pulled into that module or a different module as part of an MCQ bank for another assessment. So students can help build assessments. You can also think of it not just at that module level, but you can think of it in terms of the sector or the discipline. So if students are developing written, audio, or video pieces, they could be offered out to the sector as open educational resources, as long as you kind of work with the students so that they are doing that in an informed way. So like to give an example of that, Professor Robin de Rossa worked with her students to adapt existing materials to create an open textbook, a new open textbook as part of the course she was teaching. So it was the book was an open anthology of earlier American literature. So she basically co-wrote an open textbook with her students, and that was like part of the assessment. So at the end of that, the world has access to this open textbook, and her students, got assessed by engaging in that activity. Other types of examples there are like editing existing open textbooks. If they have the correct license, you could have students improve existing open educational resources like an open textbook. You could have them editing Wikipedia pages or creating Wikipedia pages in areas in a discipline that aren't represented well in Wikipedia, or building up any kind of open resource. Also, like you could just have students kind of working more in the open. So maybe collaborating with others outside of the module, working with students in another institution. One of the examples I've seen elsewhere is students in the United States and working with students in Egypt, and they kind of work together on an assessment. So that's like students working with students that they wouldn't normally come into contact with. Or you could have students kind of taking an assessment that's actually offered as a MOOC. So the next thing, the students are working with people all over the place, or students working with maybe professional members of a professional body, so that they're working with people who are kind of working out there in the sector professionally. All these different kind of opportunities to open up assessment more in terms of what happens with what the students do, or the ways that students are actually engaging in their assessment work. So after that long definition, what did I actually do? So after that, I got that push from hearing other people's practical examples. I put together a number of the ideas that I had been exposed to about what could you do, and I circulated that to my psychology team. And I offered them some of the examples that I just gave you. I kind of offered those different examples. We could have the students create videos that we could then pull back into the module. We could have them work in the open a bit more. We could see who else they could engage with. I gave them the different examples, and one of my colleagues, Megan Gaffney, came back and said, "I think this idea really suits one of the assignments in the developmental and educational psychology module." So sort of following the open pedagogy principle of empowering students to create and share useful information, we looked at the existing assessment structure, and we wanted to change it so that its third and final assignment, it changed from being an applied assignment in which students produced a mock report for a school, that was marked but not shared outside of the module. We wanted to change that to one where, instead of doing a mock report to a school, they were going to produce a communication either to the public or to schools or to teachers or to parents, depending on the year, depending on the way we write the particular assignment. That would be, and that what they would make would be openly shared with the public. So the assignment brief asks the students to first write a literature review on something like, for example, mental health and well-being in the young in the context of post-primary schools, or something like, or how to increase well-being in adolescence, these kinds of subjects. And then secondly, the students were going to, along with that academic writing, the students are asked to create a communication in the form of a digital poster or a digital information pamphlet or an infographic that can be shared with the public or that could be shared with that target audience. So, for example, advising schools and educators on how to improve adolescent mental health and well-being. So to give you an example of this is the kind of thing that the students were producing. So this is more an example of that kind of digital poster. So that's by one of our students, probably about 3 years ago. So in terms of the process, the students in that third assignment, they do the piece of academic writing. They produce their communication to the public, their communication to non-experts. And I suppose then there's a couple of different ways we could have done it, but what we did was I created a WordPress blog, and the students then can opt in to sharing their work on that blog. They can also choose not to. There's no penalty, there's no pressure. It's completely the student's choice to, write. They can fill in a particular form that gives their informed consent to putting a Creative Commons, a CC BY, Creative Commons Attribution License on their work. And if they do, we then share it on that WordPress blog. We share it out, and then we kind of advertise, that the student's work has been shared there. We could ask the students to create their own blogs and put it on their own blogs, and then we could have an aggregated blog that would pull them all in. But as you'll see later, the effort of producing a visual piece of communication involves the students often learning new technical skills. So we haven't made them blog it and put it up on a blog themselves, because that would be also another kind of extra piece of technology they might have to learn how to use. So we've taken it easy on them, and we kind of put it up on the blog for them so far. So Megan and I, as we were starting to do this, we wanted to not just do it, we wanted to try to study it. So we wanted to conduct a study to investigate the perceptions of these online undergraduate psychology students with regard to their engagement in an open pedagogy assessment, where their work is shared openly with the public rather than being just marked and archived at the end of the year. We wanted to sort of generate new knowledge about the impact of open educational approaches on students' perceptions of their learning. So we designed a qualitative case study grounded in the constructivist paradigm with the research question: what are students' perceptions of producing knowledge that is shared openly? So each year for the last 3 years, we've done a focus group of 60 to 90 minutes with students that have completed the module and engaged in that assignment. The data analysis method was Brown and Clark's thematic analysis, or approach to thematic analysis. And in case you're interested, we used Invivo 12 to facilitate the qualitative assignment. Not that any qualitative software or qualitative research software does the analysis for you. It only helps you do it. So what were the main themes that we found? The main themes, if I start with the one main theme, which was around developing the assessment. Some of the students reported they found this very novel. They found this very new, this process where they were sharing their work openly. Other students found it similar to other assessments they'd done. And I think it depended on how many modules the students had completed, because we have very flexible routes. Some students taking this module might have done more or less modules than others. And in some other modules, we have very creative assessments. So I think some students who might have done the social and organizational psychology module had already done an assessment where they had to produce a written piece on an organizational psychology topic, then produce a video on that topic, and then engage in peer review of other students' videos. So I think students who had done that were already exposed to a very complex, multi-part, more creative type of assignment. So they, in terms of creativity and having to produce something that wasn't just written text, those students didn't find this so new. The next kind of main theme that I would look at is students generally that came to the focus groups thought this was a good idea. They thought it was a good idea because they liked the sharing between them and their peers, and between their peers and them. You know, students felt they benefited from seeing the work of others, even after they had submitted their own, even if it was after the fact, even if it was when everyone had submitted things, they could go to the blog and they could look at their own work and put it in the context of the others' work. They could see how others approached it, and they could see the different thinking that other people had come to the task with. In after the first year of running the assignment this way, those students very much felt they benefited from being able to look at the blog and see what the previous year's students had done. You know, so they weren't starting from zero like the students in the first year were. And perhaps the students in the second and third year of running the assignment this way didn't think the assignment was as challenging and as novel as the students in the first year, simply because they could see that students had done this already. So if other students did it already, it can't be that daunting. To quote one of the students, this kind of assignment took them out of their bubble. Students talked about this assignment being a good idea because it was more real, which is really starting to get into the main themes. You know, they found the assessment more authentic, more applied, more real, that it snapped them out of a purely academic headspace. They thought it was a good idea because they said it made them think. All assessments should make students think, I think, but the students thought the assessment was a good idea because it made them stop and think more about the responsibility of information going out into the world and how that happens. We'll come back to that theme again in a minute. And the students reported that they thought the assessment was a good idea because it helped them develop skills around communication of information to non-experts and producing that information to go to non-experts or to go to the public. Not just that the assessment didn't just focus on what do they know about a subfield of psychology. So that kind of takes us to the main, I suppose, what I would think of as being the key finding from the thematic analysis, and that was in the area of reflecting on information dissemination. So it made them think about being responsible for information that goes out into the world. They had doubts about that responsibility, and were they responsible? Could they be responsible? Who should be responsible for the information that goes out into the world? Could they be responsible? If they didn't feel they could be responsible at that point in time, when did they think in the future they would be in a position to be fully responsible for putting information out into the world? The students thought about how to communicate knowledge. You know, the students described themselves as really grappling with how to best communicate information to the public, you know, to staff in schools or parents or just the public in general. And also producing information in a visual format rather than text was something that they found interesting and challenging. And also this assessment really made them think about how the public gets information. You know, it made them reflect on the process by which the information they see in the world, or that they feel they're bombarded by in the world, where does that information come from? Who creates it? How does it get out there? How qualified are the people creating that information? It made them think more about knowledge production in society, about how information that comes to them, where does that come from? They also described some struggles, some challenges around, let's say, if I kind of bring some of these together, they felt that having an assignment where they had to produce text and then produce a visual, visual communication, an infographic or a digital poster or pamphlet, they found that sometimes that took them longer than they thought it was going to. And sometimes they left the public communication element of the assignment, they left that too late, and then felt very under pressure to, as they found it a little found it technically difficult to produce a visual communication that they were happy with. Some of them felt that was very new to them. Some of the students, because they're adults, from their existing work, were very au fait with how to produce a good, a professional looking graphic. Others, they felt that they were learning a new skill, they were learning new tools, new platforms, that could help them do that. I think some of the sub themes around vague instructions and who is the public, sort of struggling with who the target audience were. Some of this comes from the first year, where maybe in the assessment instructions we weren't being specific enough, and it's a feature of the assessment that the feedback that we've gotten from students each year helps us improve the assessment over time. So in the second and third year, we definitely have been more specific about who the target audience is, not to just say it's a communication to the public. We've been more targeted in what we tell them. And another struggle is really around that sense, and we're talking about it already, about this idea of, are they qualified to advise? Are they qualified to put this information out into the world? And this was more and more of an existential struggle, which I thought was really, really good to have the students thinking about this. Are they qualified enough to communicate that knowledge to non-experts? And they speculated about the motivations of those students who opted out, who didn't opt in to share their work publicly. That they were thinking about, were these students just uncomfortable that they didn't want to share their work out with the public, or was it an issue of trust? Did they maybe not trust the teaching team enough to put the information out on their behalf? Or maybe they just didn't want to have to think about it. They didn't want to have to think about their responsibility or where was the information going. So just to look at some quotes. So these 4 quotes, I think, are they do the best job together of summing up the study findings, or showing you the kind of student voice behind the study findings. So in terms of the theme of it being a good idea, a student said, "I think it was worthwhile doing. I think it totally took me outside my comfort zone, but I'm glad of that. I think I've benefited from it." In terms of that struggle of not knowing who the public is, or trying to figure out who the public is, a student said, "We know it's communication to the public, but we don't know who the public is," which I thought was a great quote. The whole issue around responsibility, making them think more about that. A student said, "It's also making me think about the information that I'm taking in and how it's going to be used and disseminated, how I might do that, and how I'm involved in the process." So thinking about knowledge in society, where does it come from? How does it get there? Who's responsible for it? Who's qualified to put that information out there? And again, speaking to that theme, I began to doubt whether I was qualified enough to be able to advise in any kind of significant way as to how these things should be rolled out or how the information should be presented. So again, having them grapple, which this didn't seem to come up when they were just generally writing assignments or creating different types of assignments and submitting them for being to be marked or to get feedback on them. This assignment made them think about what they were doing in a very different way. So maybe it's just to pick out some further quotes in relation to some of the themes and sub-themes, just to let you hear the student voice a little bit more. In terms of it being a good idea, students said things like, they liked the premise of it, they liked the challenge, they thought it was a breath of fresh air. So they certainly, in terms of not having done open pedagogical assessments in other modules, they found this to be beneficial. In terms of it being more real, another student quote was, "I do think that it makes it more real. I suppose you're applying your knowledge. It makes it very much more real and not as academic from the point of view of educational psychology and the realization that this work goes on." and this does happen in schools, and this information needs to be there. So it makes it more real. And the student says they enjoyed that it was more applied. Now, I think there's kind of a sub theme. Maybe we will pick it out as we do more analysis of the data. But like, there's kind of a weird construction of, it's more real because it's not as academic. Why do they think academic work is not real? So it's an interesting thing to maybe pick up on. In terms of, it making them think more, another student quote was, "I would have thought about that quite a lot, because when it comes to the practical thing of making an infographic, first of all, you go, what is an infographic? And then you realize you're looking at them everywhere around you, everywhere you go. You go into a doctor's office or a health center, and the walls are plastered with this stuff. And it's information in little bite-sized chunks, and it looks nice. But that material is everywhere, and this is the way we consume information these days, in these little chunks." And the student ends it by saying, I think it is something that's worth looking at. They suddenly realized how exposed to all these kinds of information. So another sort of nice student quote is looking at information dissemination and sort of that idea of being responsible. And I thought this was very nice because it speaks to some of the risks. And we talked to the students about what it means to have work that you put out there into the world. It makes you vulnerable to criticism and to feeling that it's not going to be good enough. So you have to build up your confidence in your ideas and your ability to analyze. I think it's a step-by-step thing. And again, it should be encouraged, and I welcome the opportunity to do it. And here's the thing, and I would certainly like to feel that by the end of the degree that I'd be reasonably confident to stand over the ideas I have about psychology and be able to communicate them on some kind of level. So again, sometimes they thought, "Oh, I'm doing this now," but they only felt okay about it because that kind of we were helping them. There was authority figures there, but that really they wouldn't be ready to do this into the future. So I think some of those quotes gives you more of an idea about how the students were thinking about what they were doing and how that knowledge was going out into the world, and how knowledge around them that they were seeing elsewhere gets into the world. So in conclusion, by changing the assessment to an open pedagogical assessment, we fundamentally changed the range of things accomplished within that assessment. And to sort of to quote David Wiley again, he sort of puts this kind of approach, this practical approach to open pedagogy forward. One, we learn by the things we do. Two, the permissions granted by open licenses makes it practical and legal for us to do new things. And three, the ability to do new things leads to different kinds of learning, to new kinds of learning. And that's what we see here. The students covered the same ground in terms of the psychology topic coverage in this assessments than they did previously, but they learned so many more things by making it an open pedagogical assessment. They learned about knowledge production in society, communicating to non-experts, how to communicate complex information in a concise visual format, using Creative Commons licenses, finding and using images with in the public domain or with Creative Commons licenses, and so many more useful elements than in the original closed assignment, the disposable assignment that it was before. So what has happened with this assessment? The assessment in this format is still being used in that module. We did data collection for 3 years. So we're now going to kind of finish the analysis of that data and try and write it up and get it published. The practice itself has been used as an example, as a case study, along with many other examples of open educational practice in another Erasmus Plus funded project, the Open Game project. And I suppose where this is leading is this has been a success in that module. So we're looking for opportunities for elsewhere in the program for where we could use open pedagogical assessments in other modules. So for example, last year, we saw it and got students permission in an intermediate level research methods module to take interviews that they had conducted and use those with everyone's permission in a foundation level research methods course as interview transcripts that students would analyze as part of their assessment. So again, something produced within the course being reused elsewhere for the benefit of other students. So we're looking all the time, and we have some other team members who are very interested in looking at creating assessments where students have more choice or they have more input into the format of the assessments or how the assessments are corrected. So that is my lecture. I hope it was useful for you. Thank you very much. That this Gurev Mila Mahagov Agwiv. I'm not very good at the Irish language, but that is in the Irish language, that means, I think, a 1,000 thanks to you all. And I'm happy to move to taking some questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Brunton. I think we have a question from our YouTube Live. All right. Let me read from our colleague. Is there a system as well that allows a teacher to provide feedback to the student made assessment, have them revise it as many times as possible before they are sent out into the open? Is there a system that allows a teacher to provide feedback to the student-made assessment, have them revise it as many times as possible before they send out into the open?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that idea would be just combining a different assessment idea or combining different assessment tools. So, I mean, we have other assessments that are still closed, aren't open in any way, where the students would submit their work, get some formative feedback, and then submit the final piece of work for assessment. So certainly, and I mean, I think that would be very nice, and it might help the students to feel confident about what they're putting out there into the world if there was a formative feedback cycle where they could submit something, get feedback, and then take another run at it before it goes out into the world. Yeah, I don't think we ever thought of that for this assignment, but actually that would be a really nice idea, especially if the subject matter or something like that is the type of subject matter that might make students more cautious about putting their stuff out there into the world. And just, I suppose I didn't go into it that much, but you always have to, as part of this, you have to be confident enough yourself about what are some of the risks about working in the open. I mean, everything has a risk, everything has a cost, and you have to work with the students so that they really understand, what does it mean to put an open license on something? What will that allow others to do? If you're putting your work out there, or let's say other ideas, other types of assessments that are open would be students blogging openly or vlogging openly. Now, those carry risks. You know, you're out there in the world, you know, you're subject to criticism, you're subject to people seeing that work and deciding to react to it in whatever way. So you always have to think about what students are putting out or how the students are working, and ensure the students are doing that in a safe way, and that you are providing certain safeguards or supports, you know, to the students in doing that activity.
Thank you so much, Dr. James. I'd like to ask that colleague if there is any follow-up. May I ask, sir, if yeah. So I hope that answered, Sir Neil, your question regarding a system, and we appreciate your question. Dr. James, just to second that concern, I've heard before a kind of a negative impression of using Wikipedia as a source for academic work. So I learned recently in one of my trainings that Wikipedia is actually one of the open educational resources, or a product of the open educational resource movement. And so what is your comment on that, and in using Wikipedia as a source for academic work?
I know those tensions are there. It's more there. There is probably more educational utility in having students engage with Wikipedia as something that they can add to and improve than in using it as a source for quoting. You know, I mean, I think we still probably urge caution for students in using Wikipedia as let's say a source that you would reference. Although I always try to explain to students, you can reference anything in proper context. You can reference the most inaccurate source of information. You can still reference that as long as you're referencing it as being that, not that your source, you're saying this terrible source of information is a very good source of academic, information. So, if what you're doing is you're getting students to engage in Wikipedia to understand the production of knowledge, to understand how they can add to it. So, some great examples has been, I can't remember the name of the project, and I think it was in one of the universities in Scotland, where they saw that female scientists were not well represented within Wikipedia. So part of the students' assessment was to research those female scientists and add to, create entries where they didn't exist. But also, if you're helping students to understand the complex, controversial, contested ways in which information can be created on Wikipedia and can be sort of changed by other people and opposed by other people. I saw a fascinating article recently about a woman who thought that a lot of entries in Wikipedia around World War II were kind of glorifying war or glorifying, certain armies and things. And she was like taking lots of detail out of Wikipedia because she thought that people just need the facts here. They don't need sort of glorifying descriptions, possibly inaccurate, of particular tank battles or something. So like, as long as students understand, you're helping understand, getting students to engage with Wikipedia to understand those things, that is how Wikipedia should be understood. It is more problematic if a student just goes to Wikipedia and uses it as a, Wikipedia 2021. If that's their reference, that can be a little more problematic because that source of knowledge is continually changing. It's not a static entity.
For that, that's quite enlightening on my end. Do we have questions from our colleagues, especially those who joined us from our workshops, and also to our public audiences from YouTube Live and also joining us in Zoom? Any comments or questions? Right, so Sir Neil, the one who raised the question, the first one to raise the question, commented that your answer, Dr. James answered his query. So yeah, thank you so much, Sir Neil. And we have one question from our Zoom chat, from our colleague, my very own chairman, Dr. Hayrula. I would like to inquire regarding the developing assessment you have presented a while ago. May I know, sir, what do you mean something similar and something new?
Yeah, so I suppose if I go back in time, when I started working on these these open access, these open education online programs in 2010, the assessments tended to be very traditional across the board. They tended to be academic writing focused. And I thought that there needed to be more variety in the assessment types that were being used in order that all the kind of program outcomes around communication and leadership and teamwork and, those needed to be reflected in the assessments as well. So initially it was just a case that we were trying to introduce more variety of assessments. So introducing some online discussion and debate type assignments, introducing some more presentations, and that led to developing a program-focused assessment strategy for the program, where we really looked at the different progression routes that students could take through programs and looking to see how we could have enough variety of different assessment types across the program that students could reasonably be thought to have achieved all the module and program learning outcomes by the time they got to the end of their degree. And this over time, kind of innovating with different assessment types, led to the introduction of a number of really creative, innovative assessment types. So depending on the and maybe bigger kind of assessments in the modules, and that also led to a reduction in the number of end of year exams that we used. We took those out in order to allow more credits and more time for these bigger kind of more creative, engaging assessments. So depending on how many modules the students had done before they got to this educational and developmental psychology module, they may not have, this may have been the first of those kind of bigger, more creative type of assessments. And I think those students really found it new. And the students would never have done an open pedagogical assessment before. But if the students had maybe done some of the other modules before taking this module, because again, it's a very flexible route. A student might be in their 4th year of study by the time they take this module, or they could be in their 2nd, depending on the route they take, depending on the modules they choose and how many modules they're taking. So I think students who had encountered some of these other complex assessments, and the one that comes to mind again is one from our social and organizational psychology module, where in the last assignment, they have to write a text piece about an organizational psychology topic, record an 8-minute video kind of presenting on that the organizational psychology topic, and then they have to peer review each other's videos. Again, they get to see other people's videos and the way that they handled those presentations, and also to get them to learn the skills of providing professional constructive feedback to other people. So I think students who, let's say, who'd done that, it wasn't so strange to suddenly find this 2-part complex assessment where, this time they had to write something on developmental psychology and then produce this visual communication to the public. It wasn't so strange for them. But I think that was the difference between some students who found it, oh, I've done something like this before, or I liked that other creative assessment, so I like this creative assessment. Whereas other students, maybe they'd only done the foundation level modules before they did this one, and this was really then for them a step up and something much more creative than they had done in the foundation level modules.
Thank you very much, Dr. James. Mamunera, you have a follow-up on that? All right. So, Dr. Munera, you're muted.
Muted. Thank you, Dr. James, for that answer. Now, I really appreciate the methodology that you have, because as you have presented, the struggle, because I think 3 years you have done with this study, sir. That is why you have some struggles to.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I think this kind of assessment, it's something that you have to work at. It's something, if you introduce something new like this, I think that the best way to do it is to come at it as an innovation pilot, and to try and have a kind of a framework that you use for doing that kind of work. So rather than just doing it, try to write it up or design it in a way that you're either going to follow it up with an evaluation and then be able to show colleagues or senior managers or the sector your evaluation that, we tried this, we tracked what happened, we did an evaluation, and here is how it went. And if it didn't go that well, why did it not go well? Could it just be improved and then used again? Or should we not do it anymore if it really didn't seem to work out? Or I think even better than that is if you can design a research study around it. Evaluation and research are different kind of processes. So what we did here was, as we went into this process, we designed a research study around it so that we could track it, and over time then figure out, is it going well or not? What do we have to change? And then that eventually after a couple of years, we would be able to stop and really write it up and then share that with the sector, because there isn't that much literature specifically on open educational assessments out there. Or there definitely could be more. There definitely could be more examples. And for me, again, the reason that I got into this was from hearing and seeing practical examples from other people. So I think that's what other people need. And that's what I'm trying. That's what this was the purpose of some of the workshops. And the purpose of this lecture, again, was to try to highlight practical examples that other people can try and use, use to reflect on their own practice and say, oh, okay, that sounds like a practical thing that I could implement in a module. And then then the number of these types of assessments will increase.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sir Juniel.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. James, for sharing your thoughts on that. And I think we will be entertaining two more questions because we are already a little bit pressed in time. But very, very big question, I would say, is posted here. What do you think, Dr. James, is the biggest challenge of open pedagogical assessment in your implementation?
Yeah, it is a big question. I'll try to be concise. The biggest thing I think is the overall acceptance of open education, open approaches, open educational practices in both academic culture and culture generally. You know, the default that we seem to have in general societal culture and academic culture is to be closed. And academic culture, processes around promotion, processes around describing what we do as academic staff tends to want us to speak individually. What is your contribution as an individual? And I've seen in my own institution sort of promotional paperwork, and recently I was successful in getting a senior fellowship from Advanced HE, which is a UK-based organization, but it's about your teaching and learning practice. Again, the paperwork that they wanted you to fill out was, pushed you to say, what was your contribution? And specifically, even if you worked as a team, you have to be very clear about what you did in the team. Whereas like being open, it's more about sharing, it's more about community, it's more about working communally. And it's kind of it's making this mindset shift. And I suppose speaking about what I was talking about previously, these practices will be more accepted where teaching and learning is more accepted as being equally as important as research and things like that. And where engaging in open educational work is clearly and explicitly recognized in hiring, in promotion, in things like that. So overall, it's the culture. And after that, it's about having infrastructure there that is easy for people to use. Sometimes, there's a little bit of a hump to get over when people start engaging with open educational resource repositories or open textbook repositories, where it might seem a bit overwhelming, so there's specific ways to try and help people to engage with that, or having, if there can be champions within your institution, if there can be good librarians that are into educational resources and educational practices, if they can help people to get over that hump, so that's the really, really big answer. And then the slightly different one is just the practical thing of helping people to start engaging in this area. Because once you start engaging with, let's say, open textbooks, it's no more work than trying to navigate, which edition of a textbook you should be using, or what ebook license the publisher will allow you to use.
And thank you so much, Dr. James. And one final question. I think this is more of a clarification. I think this question pointed out to your example of having students create assessment items or questions as an open assessment, as a form of open assessment. And the question goes like, it seems that by allowing the students to make questions as a form of assessment, the main skill that they develop is question making. What other skills can students develop by engaging in open pedagogy assessment? So that,
I mean, yeah. I mean, I took that example. That's an example that I taken from someone else. So Rajiv Jangiani works in an institution in Canada, and he's a huge sort of proponent and champion of open educational practices. But one of the things that he did with colleagues was he did an open pedagogical assessment like that, where students contributed to the creation of a huge, I think it was a social psychology, it was definitely some psychology topic, MCQ bank. So they helped build this huge bank, and then the MCQ would actually just randomly, it'd be one of those kinds of structures where they would randomly pull down a selection of those MCQs for students to then do an assessment. So that assessment, that process was set up in such a way that like the process where they had to think about the question critically. What's the question going to be? What are the MCQ options going to be? Which will be the wrong answers, and which one will be the almost right answer, but not quite. And so that's getting them to think more deeply than they might just studying the stuff in the textbook and then answering an MCQ. So I think the skills, like if you think about the different examples that I gave, it kind of depends on like what is the module, what is the subject matter, what are the knowledge, skills, and competencies that you want them to develop for that module. Across your whole program, then, are there program learning outcomes that you don't think are being served well by the assessment load across the program? And then you can look at the different, I mean, this is more general, you could look at different assessment types, to see what different assessment type would help to answer, to plug that gap, to fill that need that you see in your assessments. And if an open pedagogical assessment fits with that is how I would line up. That I think probably there's lots of different types of open assessment. So it's more about identifying the need you have, and then looking at what assessment type can fit with that, and then thinking about in what way could you make that open or not, if to look at the appropriateness of that. That's a very psychologist answer. We're not good at answering questions clearly, but like I think that's my answer.
right, thank you so much, Dr. James. And I guess, I kind of follow the principle that we really go back to what we intend to measure in our assessment. So I think, I hope that clarified your question, Sir Neil. And I'd like to also read some of the comments that our students are sharing in the YouTube Live. And coming from our colleague again, I think this practice also allows us to avoid piracy. Yeah, I agree with that. And some of our students said, thank you, Dr. James. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. James, for the knowledge you shared. This webinar is a big help for students and teachers. Thank you, Dr. James. And thank you. And daming thank you message. There's a lot of thank you message. Thank you so much, Dr. James, for imparting us your insight in this matter. Surely this would be a great help for all educators and future educators. And maraming salamat, students, for sharing your thoughts about this webinar. And I guess we will end our open forum there. And if you have other questions, feel free to reach out. And I guess through our coordinator, we may be able to channel some of your queries and interests to our visiting professor. And today's lecture has been full packed. We started off by reviewing some of the open educational resources and how we might be able to use open licenses in our own work. And then we proceeded with some examples of open educational practices and a specific case that presented to us a case of using open pedagogy assessment. And we've learned a lot from those things, the principles and examples that are given to us by Dr. James. And I guess ending this day's program with a great appreciation to our visiting professor is definitely in order. So I would like to invite everyone, since Dr. James already given us thanks in his Irish language, I guess we have to respond in kind. And let's just together unmute ourselves and say to Dr. James, daghang salamat sa imo, Dr. James. So can we do that? Ladies and gentlemen, saya. So daghang salamat ra gid akong mabalaan. Mamuner, you might wanna add something in Maranao. So yeah. All right, in 3, 2, 1, let's say daghang salamat, Dr. James.
Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, everyone. And yes, so daghang salamat, Dr. James means many thanks or thank you very much. So ayan. And I guess I would like to call in now our Assistant Dean for my mistake. All right, so I would like to, join me, ladies and gentlemen, to award this certificate of appreciation again to Dr. James. And the citation reads, Certificate of Appreciation is presented to Dr. James Brunton from the Republic of the Philippines, MSU-IIT College of Education for his excellent contribution as distinguished visiting professor of the College of Education, MSU-IIT from September 27 to October 14, 2021, signed by the Dean of the College, Dr. Amelia T. Buwan, and our Chancellor of the Institute, Dr. Socarno D. Tanggol. Once again, Dr. James, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Assistant Dean of the College, representing the Dean, Dr. Ami Buwan, Professor Lucero will now be giving his closing message.
Good afternoon. Sir General, can you hear me? Again, good afternoon. On behalf of Dr. Amelia T. Buwan, our College Dean, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the participants for joining this public lecture of Dr. James Brunton on open education, open educational practices. To Dr. James, in our dialect, as mentioned by Sir Janelle, salamat kayo. It means thank you so much for sharing your expertise to us on open education. We learned so much from your lecture. We also thank the Department of Professional Education under the leadership of Dr. Nancy Hernandez for hosting, and with Assistant Professor Gerald Similia for spearheading the activity, and our MC, Sir Janelle Medina, thank you. To some of us, maybe this is the first time we hear about open education, and I hope what we learned today can help us rethink our educational practices and become part of a working community promoting education to help expand the access of quality learning anytime and anywhere. Once again, thank you and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Luel Lucero, for your closing message. And once again, I thank all audiences, especially our YouTube Live. We will now be closing the program. But before I go, I'd like to remind you, our dear students and audiences in the YouTube Live, to fill in our evaluation link as posted by our AVMC. And I'd like to request our Zoom participants to stay for a while. And we'll have our photo opportunity with Dr. James Brunton. So once again, thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon. All right. So